Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate was the last mainline Monster Hunter title in which we saw the swimming mechanic within a Monster Hunter game, and since then we are yet to see the mechanic return, but could we see it in the next console Monster Hunter title? Swimming as a mechanic got a lot of love and hate whilst it was present within Monster Hunter, and that was during the time period of Monster Hunters Tri and 3 Ultimate. For me personally, I was a fan of the mechanic, and I would have been perfectly fine with it becoming a staple of the hunting gameplay. I love the idea of not being confined to land and being able to dive into that patch of water you can see, or even an ocean area to chase after that Plesioth or the Gearcrest, whatever the water monster was. And I think it added a depth to the game that isn't found in the other entries, and the combat of course was quite jarring underwater to an extent, but I always found it charming in a way and kind of realistic with how it was more sluggish and restrictive, and while it still gave the player a fighting chance, I think it did a good job in capturing water combat, but of course not in a way that it would be extremely enjoyable, but just in a way that I could accept it and respect for what it was. A lot of players did get annoyed with this underwater combat, with many weapons becoming quite annoying to use while submerged. However, I found my main weapons, which were primarily the greatsword, sometimes the dual blades or hammer, worked pretty well underwater, so I wasn't as frustrated as others when it came to this. And of course, most of the game doesn't take place underwater, so I wasn't too fussed, and I would try avoid it where I could with the optional quests. But when I did come to underwater combat, I wasn't too annoyed with it, especially when I was like farming Lagiacrus, for example. I was able to farm him repeatedly, whether that was my original playthrough back when the game was in its life cycle, or even for the series that I did on my channel when I was farming Lagiacrus off camera, where I had to kill it like roughly, I would say, 10 times, whether that was a capture or a kill. The underwater combat wasn't too frustrating, and I think the fact that you can evade up and down, like vertically, that did actually end up helping me. So I think the underwater combat, at least from my experience, was good enough. At least by my standards. It wasn't frustrating, to say the least. So the question is whether or not we will see the return of swimming in Monster Hunter, and I think that is a pretty likely yes. And of course, I'm not saying that the swimming mechanic was done really well in 3 Ultimate, it definitely wasn't, but I think the swimming as a mechanic was excellent in concept, and while it wasn't executed great in 3 Ultimate and Monster Hunter Tri, like as well as it could have been at least, like it definitely had a lot of untapped potential. I really hope they do have it under consideration for each Monster Hunter title that's, like, of course in development, and I hope that they do consider it for whatever the next mainline game is, whether that's World 2, which probably won't be the name of course, because they don't generally have sequels to Monster Hunter games. It's usually the next evolution of the series. I hope they do have swimming at least considered, and if it gets implemented, that would be extremely awesome. And the idea of it being in the world sequel or whatever the next console mainline Monster Hunter ends up being, that is quite unknown as to how likely that is, and I don't think anyone but the developers can say for sure whether or not it will be in the game. And I would love to see it return, from my perspective at least, purely based on how immersive it can make the game and just how much it adds in terms of just depth for the game, because obviously having the swimming mechanic expands to having underwater combat, underwater exploration, different types of monsters they can bring in. So I really hope that we do get to see it at least some point in the next at least 2 to 3 Monster Hunter games, if not the next one after Sunbreak. And I think they have enough feedback from Generation 3 games to optimize it so it's more enjoyable and fair for the hunter. How I would love to see it executed is Capcom going above and beyond with creating a whole new moveset for every weapon type for its underwater gameplay, making the moves more varied and different to how they would handle on land to accommodate for better traversal while being submerged. They could even include like a traversal utility similar to the Wire Bug and Clutch Claw that allows for better movement underwater, and they could even make a variation on the Clutch Claw, as I feel like that's already a relatively realistic one to bring back. Of course, I hope they don't bring back the weakening mechanic to it, but the Clutch Claw itself, I did enjoy the idea of it being able to clutch onto things, whereas the Wire Bug is of course a bug that I'm not entirely sure how the Wire Bug works. That's a video for another day, but I think it's like a bug that flies around and you can attach yourself to it, and then that's just the general gist of how it works. Of course, that could work underwater as well, but I don't know if it's a waterproof bug. But the Clutch Claw, I think they definitely could have a variation of it that allows it to work underwater, and I think that all the feedback in general, a lot of it would help in creating, like, making the movement and gameplay overall feel less clunky and slow in water, so they would be able to avoid all the issues regarding those. And I think if Capcom were able to pull this off, it would be massive. As in the gaming industry as a whole, I don't think Water Combat and just in general just being underwater is quite a daunting task for developers to get right, and from the top of my head, I can't think of a game like Monster Hunter that has got it right with its underwater combat. So if they did manage to pull it off, I think it would be extremely awesome and a very big, like, factor of the game that would bring a lot of players in. So let me know down below, guys, what you think of underwater combat and whether or not you would like to see it return, and if you do think it should return, how would you like to see it return? I think the next console Monster Hunter title would be perfect for the swimming mechanic to return, due to how much that comes along with the mechanic itself, like I said before, with like the increase of different like variety of monsters, the exploration underwater, and of course the revisiting of the combat underwater. But of course time will tell, and with Sunbreak on the horizon for Monster Hunter Rise, I think it will be a decent bit of time before we get any information on the next mainline Monster Hunter title. As always, if you did enjoy it, a like would be extremely appreciated. It does help out the channel a ton. And subscribe for a lot more Monster Hunter content. Don't forget to join our Discord, links at the top of the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.